Hey everyone, today we are going to be doing a video called Buffy versus the World. Now it's not really going to be Buffy versus the world, it's going to be Buffy versus all of the other unmatched fighters. So yes, we are going to go over the entire unmatched roster, and I'm going to give you advice on what to do as Buffy into that matchup. This is going to be a two-part video. Part one is going to feature all of the public domain fighters. Part two will have the licensed characters. Now let's start by taking a look at a few things about Buffy here. Generally, the Buffy set is considered to be the weakest set in all of Unmatched. Buffy being the best character out of all of those by most people's opinions. So generally speaking, the advantages of Buffy is her special ability, which will let her move through spaces containing opposing fighters, which can be really big when there are a bunch of fighters on the board. She is very mobile. She does get to move around a lot. She has a lot of good area of effect or damage that can be dealt in the area around her. She can be very aggressive. She is built to be kind of an aggressive deck. She does have a lot of card draw, which can be good or bad. Now going into the downsides, looking at that card draw, that along with the fact that she has a low number of passes or potentially no passes, depending on which way you decide to play her, that can be a problem there for anyone that wants to try to take you into exhaustion, because you really don't fare well there. And the biggest disadvantage that generally the damage output on her is kind of undertuned. She generally kind of runs out of steam and doesn't quite get a lot of the other fighters down enough to defeat them. And looking at one of the other unusual things that Buffy has, which will be this thing here, are you going to go with Giles or are you going to go with Xander? Because she has a choice of her sidekick there. It is, as it says on the card, Giles or Xander. Xander giving her some additional attack cards and a versatile 2 that can move up to a 6 if he's adjacent to Buffy. Giles has some schemes in there. One of his schemes gives you some additional card draw, which you may or may not need. The big one he has is Insight, which is basically choose an opponent and look at their hand and choose a card for them to discard. You get to just look in their hand and yoink a card out. So that is a pretty big effect, and Giles does have 3 of those. And there's a few questions you're going to need to ask concerning if you're going to go with Giles or Xander. The first question is, does your opponent have some key cards that if they lose them are going to really devastate them? A number of key cards that can be really important, that can point you towards needing to get Giles to be able to go in there and pull those out. Another one is, does your opponent have just a bunch of health that you have to punch through? If you need to get through a stupid amount of health, you may have to just go with Xander to be able to get that extra offensive damage to be able to take them down. Another question is, if you go with Giles, are you going to be able to keep Giles alive? Because just the fact that this card exists, Insight, that usually puts a big target right on Giles that Xander tends to not get. So they tend to come after Giles a little bit more harshly. They come after him right away. A lot of times it'll be like a kill on sight order for Giles. Xander does have at least a couple of versatiles that he can do something else with. And so if you think Giles isn't going to survive, you may need or want to go with Xander to be able to make sure that he actually lasts through there and to get some sort of usefulness out of him. We're going to go through these sets somewhat chronologically as they came out, so we'll be starting with Battle of Legends Volume 1. So we'll start off first with King Arthur. Now, King Arthur, I think, to answer the big question right off the bat, I think this is going to be a Xander matchup here. That's going to be for a number of reasons. King Arthur has a sidekick who can do some good work there, so I think that Arthur and Merlin could run down Giles pretty easily there. We have 18 health to dig through on Arthur. You do have Holy Grail that you have to think about, and that can make you have to go through some additional health to have to dig through if you end up running into that. Now, while there are a number of good cards you can pull out of here, and there's any deck that will have good cards you can pull out, the two that really matter for Arthur the most are going to be these two, Excalibur and Lady of the Lake, because that's his biggest single attack without it being boosted. And that's two cards out of the 30 that will really punish Arthur horribly. There's a lot in here that he's not even going to much notice. A lot of the Merlin cards are not going to really be super critical. Definitely go with Xander and just try to be aggressive and run him down and be smart about taking attacks from him. Generally speaking, King Arthur's a pretty good matchup for Buffy. Next we have Alice. This is also going to be a Xander matchup, mainly just because of the Jabberwock there. I think if it comes into like Jabberwock versus Giles, that Giles is going to go down pretty quick on that. And Alice can run him down there with the sidekick pretty easily. She does have some pretty good healing in there, so that 13 health that she has is a little deceiving. It's a bit more than that, and you're going to need some of Xander's offense to be able to deal with that. This is kind of a bit of an uphill battle for Buffy, but it is one that's definitely winnable for her. Next, we will have Sinbad. Sinbad also is going to be a Xander matchup. Now, the reason for that isn't because of Sinbad being able to get around the board easily, although that is true. The cards that will really hurt Sinbad the most are going to be losing voyages, but outside of this one voyage right here, Voyage Home, any of the others getting thrown into discard, by the way that the voyages work, it's not necessarily the worst thing for him. And there's other stuff in here. I mean, once again, there's a lot else in here you could pull out that could be nice, but I just think that you're just better off having the defensive damage to be able to punch through the health that Sinbad has there. And also the fact that Sinbad doesn't have any passes kind of evens things out for you. Sinbad is an okay matchup for Buffy. One that's definitely winnable, but not really an advantage for her. Medusa. Well, Medusa, I think this is one that you actually take Giles into and not Xander. Really, there's a few key cards in here that you could pull out. I think you're going to have to hope to be able to get your insights and to be able to start pulling out either Gaze of Stones or second shots, or maybe momentary glances and getting those out of there. Now, can Medusa do things to take out Giles? Yes, she can. And that brings up the Giles paradox. So what is the Giles paradox? Well, here is the Giles paradox. Giles has one job. One job. The one job that Giles has against Medusa is to pull out Gaze of Stone. Yank that out of there. That's his job. Get that card gone. The threat of Giles hanging around and yoinking Gaze of Stone or something else big out of Medusa's deck is a huge thing. It may be such a big thing that Medusa may look at the fact that Giles doesn't have a whole lot of defense cards and that the Buffy player may not want to commit to a bunch of defense cards for Giles, and so she may be willing to go ahead and throw a big card such as this to go ahead and just nuke Giles. So Giles' job is to pull out Gaze of Stone. If the Medusa player throws Gaze a stone at Giles to get rid of him. Has Giles done his job? As with most fighters, Buffy playing against Medusa is not a particularly good thing. This is very much a lopsided against Buffy matchup here, and you'd have to be really fortunate to be able to pull out the right things there. But I think using Giles to pull those cards out is really the only shot you're going to have. So going into Bigfoot versus Robin Hood, we have Bigfoot. On the Bigfoot matchup, it's like, does it matter? I mean, it's Bigfoot. What is Buffy going to do against Bigfoot? I guess if you're going to do it, go ahead and take Giles. Not that he can't run down and kill Giles easily with Bigfoot or Jackalope, but maybe you'll get some fortunate card draw. You'll get your insights early. You can start pulling some stuff out of Bigfoot's deck. Maybe some jackalope horns, maybe some logs, maybe just some of his cancels so he doesn't have so many of them. But this is just a bad matchup. Robin Hood. I think Robin Hood could kind of go either direction there. There's some cards that can be good to pull out of his deck. They're not like anything like super devastating if he loses it. I mean, you know, losing like 5 damage or something can be bad. And highway robberies can actually be pretty good to pull out of there if you're going to use Giles. Although with just 13 health and no healing, Xander can do a lot of damage into Robin Hood. One thing to keep in mind with Robin Hood cannot defend with anything higher than a 3, which means that this card right here, Daring Strike, is guaranteed to win against Robin Hood. Okay, so the nasty otherwise take 1 damage thing won't ever be going off against Robin Hood. The card draw could be feinted if he throws a feint into it, and honestly, you're probably fine to deal the 2 damage over the feint. But you can play this a lot more freely. A lot of times you may want to like run up with like Xander or something if you're going to use Daring Strike and let him play it so he takes the damage if it goes bad. But in this case, you could have Buffy do it, or even Giles throw it if Giles is in a place to. Really, this one is considered a pretty good matchup for Buffy. She does well into Robin Hood. A lot of the fighters with the 1 health sidekick she can do really well with because of Cartwheel Kick and Slayer Strength. There's some like Medusa where that's an exception, but it is very much true here. Cobble and Fog. We have Invisible Man. Invisible Man is absolutely a Giles matchup, and I will tell you exactly why. Invisible Man relies a lot on his schemes to get the damage out and to deal damage. He's also not like a very quick fighter in there. He tends to be pretty slow, tends to come at you over the course of the game, a lot of times just trying to exhaust you. And so really there are some key cards that if you can pull them away from Invisible Man, it gives him a hard time being able to actually get the job done and take you out. First off, you can get either of these right here, these schemes that deal damage. You've just really put him down a lot because that's some damage to output that he's no longer going to have, and that's going to be a pass that he's losing, which is going to be important. Another reason to take Giles is to make sure that you get those passes for Buffy. You could take something like Surprise Attack, which is a 5 that cancels effects on a card. That's a big source of damage for him, and losing that attack card is huge. You have Impossible to See, which just ignores the value of the card. It still leaves effects to happen, but most of Buffy's effects aren't going to be hugely devastating. I mean, you could like deal like 1 damage into Invisible Man by any of her card effects. It's really the card itself that you need to be taking, need to have the damage from that combat card. And so him losing this, that's just a little bit more damage that he can take. And then honestly, even if you were to start pulling out something like Into Thin Air, which is just a pretty solid defense, or even Vanish, which is just kind of a double pass that just starts taking away a lot of Invisible Man's options. This is actually a pretty decent matchup for Buffy. So going into Jekyll and Hyde, this is also a Giles matchup. Really, once again, just pulling out the damage cards from Hyde can really slow things down. So like a Pure Evil, a Strange Case, or Forever Hyde, getting those out can really do a lot there. There's other cards like Duality of Man can be pretty good. Honestly, Skirmish is one of the few defense options that Hyde has that's really worth anything. So getting those out of there, even as basic a card as that is, can really hurt him a lot. Next is Sherlock Holmes. Now, Sherlock is an interesting one that he's one of the really strong fighters in there. This is going to need to be a Giles matchup for you to have any type of chance on it. And the reason for that is that Insight, just the fear of Insight being in the card means that a lot of times fighters will not hang on to a card in their hand for a long time if Giles is still on the board out of fear of losing it to Giles. And what that does with Sherlock is that can make Sherlock have to play a little bit suboptimally if they haven't taken Giles out yet. Sherlock doesn't have a massive amount of output damage, and a lot of his schemes are going to specifically deal damage to the heroes. Then you get things like the Eliminate and Confirm combo, where you play Eliminate to look at the hand, pull a card out, and then play Confirm Suspicion after taking a look at it, knowing what's in the hand to be able to choose the right thing and pull that out of there. There's other cards that also play off of hand knowledge there, but Sherlock may not be able to play things in the order that he wants to. He may have to play cards quicker than he wants to out of fear of losing it from Giles, which means that things like the Game is Afoot or Service Revolver might have to be thrown at Giles instead of Buffy to try to get him off the board. And that is some damage that Sherlock would really like to be throwing into the hero. This isn't a really good matchup at all. It's a pretty bad one there, but you can kind of mess with Sherlock a little bit, doing some of Sherlock's same things back to him and potentially be able to get a win that way. Dracula, this is kind of a lower health character, so it's a great one to take Giles into, although he does have a lot of ways of dealing damage into Dracula with the sisters. Really, you want to mainly play Giles on this to try to catch like beast form. If you can make him start losing beast forms, that hurts him a lot. There's other cards that are also really great to pull out of there. Ambush can do a lot of damage to it. And once again, just like Sherlock, having Giles on the board can make Dracula kind of wary of hanging on to certain cards in his hand all the time, and he may not want to keep something in his hand, which beast form is something you definitely have to kind of like build your hand up to be able to play. So it can end up causing Dracula some problems there. Buffy is okay into Dracula. She can do pretty well there. It's definitely winnable, but not necessarily an overwhelmingly easy one. Little Red versus Beowulf. This is going to be a Xander matchup that you need to be able to, with Red's healing, and also because of how much of a threat the Huntsman is, you need to be able to have Xander's additional offense to be able to deal with the Huntsman, because you really just can't let him hang around. Now this matchup is going to be with Buffy, as it is with most fighters, going to be about paying attention to the symbols that is on the basket. Now, generally speaking here, Wolf's Bane, the worst that can usually come out is this card right here, which can cancel effects but also ignore the value. And that's just kind of a risk that you have when you're playing against Wolf's Bane there. Once both of these are accounted for, there's nothing else really nasty that can happen with an attack on Wolf's Bane. So that can be good for you to have. Knives, you have Stones in the Belly and Once Upon a Time. Once Upon a Time just dealing 3 damage, and Stones in the Belly basically being like an ambush. This one's more, it doesn't really matter what you play into Once Upon a Time. It's just going to be kind of be bad no matter what. So hopefully You went ahead and threw something big at it there. Stones in the belly, of course, can pull a card out of your hand, which can be pretty bad for you. The pelt being dealing damage back equal to the printed value. And actually, when red has pelts on her basket, that's a good time to throw like regroups or feints at it there, because a feint would just cancel this here, and this is damage that red's planning on getting into you, and attacking with a feint into that is a win. Also, attacking with a regroup, yeah, she's going to deal 1 damage back to you, but that is really not what red is wanting to do there. And I know you won't do any damage, but red will do damage to you, but that's honestly kind of a win with the way that card works. And of course, you got like these guys to deal with everywhere in her deck. So definitely, until both of these are accounted for, don't go throwing pointies into a pelt. The other thing to think about is that if knives are not on the basket, then the only thing that Huntsman would be able to defend with is going to be like a 2. He's going to be really pretty weak if knives aren't in the basket. So that's something to remember about with Daring Strike. That Daring Strike, outside of knives, will absolutely go through, deal some damage to Huntsman, and avoid the nasty side effect for it, and give you the card draw off of it. This is a matchup that isn't like an amazing one for Buffy, but she actually has a better shot at this than she really ought to. Beowulf is definitely going to be a Xander matchup. This guy's just way too beefy to have Giles go up against. Something to be aware of when he has a bunch of rage and is attacking is that this no contest expecteth, where if he wins combat with this, he could spend 3 rage and just completely nuke your sidekick. So be very wary of that there. That's another reason to not go with Giles in this one. He's also so beefy at 17 health that you've got to do some damage into him. This isn't a really great one for Buffy, because a lot of times she's only doing 1 or 2 damage into Beowulf, which he's honestly kind of okay with most of the time, because that just gives him rage. So and you also have to remember that things like Cartwheel Kick and Slayer Strength, that's going to be effect damage. So if you were to use Slayer Strength in particular on offense, if you dealt damage with Slayer Strength, that would be a rage, and then if you were to use the effect afterwards, that would be more rage. So this is not a particularly good one for Buffy. So Battle of Legends Volume 2, we have Achilles. This is a Xander matchup because Giles just dies. One of the few advantages that Buffy will have in this is it's quite often for Beowulf to position Patroclus in front of Beowulf to where the opposing fighter cannot get to Achilles, where they'd have to maneuver around, and they just use Patroclus as a body block, knowing that most fighters don't want to try to actually kill Patroclus, because you don't want to make Beowulf angry, or don't want to make Achilles angry and give him that that effect that he has there. Although doing it at the right time could be interesting. Well, that tactic of using Patroclus to block doesn't really work with Buffy, because she can go through opposing fighters with her ability. So you are taking one advantage that Achilles usually has away from him, to where he can't really body block with Patroclus. At least from Buffy, he can still body block from either Giles or Xander, because they don't get to go through like Buffy does. This is generally not a pretty good one for Buffy. It's a lot of health to have to dig through on here, and usually once Achilles gets big and angry, it's just hard to be able to survive all that. Sun Wukong. He's got 17 health, which is, kind of 17 health, since he has to, wants to make clones. This is going to be a Giles matchup here, because there are some key cards that you want to pull out of here. Wukong has to be very careful about positioning, because if he ever leaves a space open, then Buffy can get through the clones and get in there to actual Wukong proper, which is the main thing, being able to get to Wukong himself. She does have a lot of defensive damage with Cartwheel Kick and Slayer Strength, which are both good for wiping out a bunch of clones. Ox form and tortoise form are both big numbers, but they do allow the opponent to boost, and Buffy has very high numbers, which means a lot of times she can, because Buffy can boost all the way up to an 8, which can completely stop an ox form. As far as a tortoise form, being able to boost up over 8, she could still get a lot of damage over the tortoise, so these are not particularly scary. The other thing you'll want to do, try to do is find Giles' Insights and use them to pull out these 2 cards right here, because these are the cards that just stop all damage to Wukong. This just, Bewilderment straight up ignores it. Golden Chainmail directs it back. Now, Buffy doesn't hit particularly hard, so usually Golden Chainmail is not dealing a whole lot back. I mean, the most it could ever deal back to her would be 1, so it's not. So it's mainly just the blocking on this that is a threat, not so much the damage side of it. But you still want to get those out of there, because if you can start pulling some of these out, then Wukong has less defenses when you actually get to Wukong himself and have a chance to hit him and not his clones. There's other cards that are good to get out there. 72 Transformations is great because that can stop a lot of his recursion. And so this can actually be a pretty good matchup for Buffy. She can actually do really well into Sun Wukong. Bloody Mary is also a Giles matchup. Because her being a solo fighter, she really can't get around and go after Buffy and Giles both really easily. So you should be able to position Giles where Mary isn't going to be able to just get rid of him real easily. If she does, she's going to have to waste if she does decide to go after Giles, she's got to waste a 3rd action card on him. Really, the big key thing that Mary has most of her damage coming from are either going to be jump scares or the cards that have the additional 3rd action effects. So if you could pull those cards out, either jump scare, particularly like a speak 3 times, get some of those out of there, that can really hurt her. Even something like Closer Than She Appears, pulling that out of there is huge, because that's stopping one of her guaranteed 3rd actions, and that can really be strong against her. I think that Buffy can do really well into Bloody Mary, especially if you're able to get into her hand and start pulling out some of those cards. With Yanninga, this is going to be a Xander matchup, because I don't know that there are key cards in here that really debilitate Yanninga. What you're going to have to do is go in and be super aggressive, like just crazy aggressive, and keep coming at her. You can do things like use Slayer Strength on defense to throw Yanninga and her archers into different zones so that you can actually hit Yanninga without her archers next to her. That's going to be a crucial thing to have to be able to do. And of course, Buffy's ability of being able to run through fighters is going to be a big thing, because she really can't hide behind her archers as easily because of that. This is one that really, you can be really aggressive and it will feel really good, like you were just going through there and just tearing up Yanninga. It feels like you're in control, and then you just kind of run out of cards, and usually you don't end up having enough to quite get it done, because Yanninga with those archers sharing her health, she can just like tank so well with those guys. So I think this one's winnable, but it's a hard one for Buffy, because Yanninga can just like do so well against them. So going into Houdini versus Genie. Houdini. Well, you look at Houdini and you're like, well, he's only 14 health. Bess is only 5 health, and it's pretty squishy. So it's pretty easy to get rid of her. You think this would be a good Giles matchup. Well, there's a thing about Houdini that becomes a problem. Magician never reveals his secrets. Giles has one job, insight. That's your one job, Giles. Get in there and reach and grab cards out of Houdini's deck. Oh, you can't. Yeah, this card can really be a problem. Now, you can play, let's play the odds. Giles does have 3 insights. Got 3. Houdini's got one right there. 1 copy of Magician never reveals his secrets. Okay, so just looking at just statistics and probabilities here. Probabilities are that you're going to find an insight before he finds this card. Do you want to do that? I mean, you don't know when that's going to come. I mean, this is a one-off. It's 1 in 30. That could be late in his deck, and you could have like all these insights and just wreck him. But if this comes up early, you could get like none of the insights out. And is getting 1 insight worth doing it there? Do you need to get 2 out to make it worth bringing Giles into this? I think that this 1 card right here, I mean, you can try to play it and just see if you can get lucky and get some of those, see if you can get cards out before this shows up. But generally speaking, I think it just because of that 1 card, that 1 out of 30 cards there, that this has to be a Xander matchup. This is probably not a particularly great one for Buffy. The Genie. The thing with the Genie is he tries to just rush you down and take you out as quick as he can. So if he can manage to get one of those crazy turns in, he can completely annihilate you there. But when Genie doesn't get one of those turns in, he loses a lot. If you start going into Genie's hand and start pulling cards out that he needs to be able to manufacture one of those big massive turns from hell, then if you can do that with Giles, then you can really make it where Genie will have a difficult time being able to do anything to you there. Genie really can't do a whole lot of damage to Giles unless he decides to use one of those big massive turns on Giles, which you'll consider a win if you're Buffy, because he's not throwing that into Buffy then. So yeah, go ahead and like use 12 cards on 1 turn and take out Giles. I mean, that's not a problem for Buffy. I think this one can be pretty good for her, but it's just a weird one in that Genie can like go on a tear and just beat anybody. And he tends to either go on a tear and destroy anybody, or he gets beat. And that's usually how his games go. And lastly, even though it's not out yet, let's go ahead and take a look at these Tales to Amaze characters from the Unmatched Adventures set that will be upcoming. I haven't had a chance to play these guys a whole lot yet because I've just kind of looked them over. We don't have the physical sets yet, but I can get an idea about what they're going to look like and kind of throw out some ideas. Tesla is going to be probably a Giles matchup because he's not going to be able to really effectively go after Buffy and Giles if you split up and go different directions. And he is ranged, which can make it a little bit easier for him to get around. I don't know that this will be a particularly good one, but it is. I think Buffy might be able to have a shot at it there. Any Christmas is going to hit really, really hard. And her Psychic Charlie is also going to be pretty good. I think this one is going to be a Xander matchup. The thing that you will have as an advantage, especially early, if you can get the right cards early, Annie's special ability is that she gets +2 on her attacks against fighters with more health than her. Well, Xander, until very late in the game, Xander will not ever have more health than her. So you don't have to worry about her attacks into Xander quite as much. That would also technically be true of Giles if you decided to go that way, but I still think you may need Xander for the offensive output. And early in the game, just right off the bat, Buffy's going to have less health, so Annie will not start off with that effect. I think Annie is going to be a lot for Buffy to have to deal with. We can see how it goes, but I think that's probably going to be pretty Annie favored. Golden Bat, it's going to be a lot about kind of playing keep away from him. Just don't keep. I think you can use Giles to pull cards out of his hand and take away a lot of his good stuff, and just don't keep Giles near him because he needs to attack without using the maneuver action to be able to get his bonuses. He does have cards to give him movement that he can use to move somewhere without having to use a maneuver action. But if he's throwing those into Giles, then he's not throwing those into Buffy, and you might honestly consider that a win of sorts. You may be able to also get into his hand and pull those out before he can use them. So that's definitely, I think, going to be a Giles matchup. I don't know that this will be a particularly good one for Buffy, but we'll see how it goes. With Jill Trent, I think that Jill and Daisy just make short work of whatever sidekick you throw out there, so you might as well have Xander and try to throw some damage into it, or use like Right Hand Man defensively to make them have to waste some other cards into it. I think this is another one that's not going to be particularly good for Buffy. I think that Jill is going to be really difficult for her to take down. All right, well, that is the end of part 1 with all of the public domain fighters. We'll get into public 2 with the licensed characters later on. So what do you all think? Do you think that any of this makes sense? Is Buffy able to do these things in the matchups that I said she could? Do you have some sort of secret tech to throw out there for Buffy in one of these matchups that I missed? Well, if you want to let us know, put it down in the comments. You can also give this video a thumbs up and a like, and you can also subscribe to my videos. Make sure you don't miss anything and catch everything that I post. We'll see you around next time.